Welcome to Podcast Hackers, the show for podcasters by podcasters. Here, each episode you'll hear from the best and brightest podcasters and learn how they're growing their audience, monetizing their shows, and making an impact through podcasting. And now your host, Craig Hewitt.
Hey there, and welcome back to another edition of Office Hours by the team at Castos. I'm Craig Hewitt, the founder of Castos, and on with us today is Denise from our marketing group. Hi, Denise.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, going well. So we're a couple of minutes ahead of the top of the hour. And so folks that are just popping into the webinar now, if you could do two things. One, in the chat area, just pop in and say hi and where you are kind of logging in from, so we can know kind of who's here and where you're coming from. And then the second thing is we have a poll running about audience engagement, which is the kind of the mini topic that we'll be talking about for the first 10 or 15 minutes. So if you could scroll down on the screen here and answer kind of where audience engagement sits in your overall podcast strategy. I think it's a really interesting topic, and maybe like one of the few things that I think is a really interesting pattern match between the really successful shows. They almost all have some high degree of audience engagement, and they all do it a little differently. And shows that might struggle to get traction is, you know, you're podcasting and someone else is listening, but you don't know. So that's kind of the whole thing, is how do you know that people are listening and that what you're saying is really resonating with them. So we're going to talk about that for the first 10 or 15 minutes today. So if you could scroll down on your webinar software there and answer our poll question about how you do with audience engagement, so we can know kind of where everyone's coming from. And for the folks that are just coming in, if you could drop in the chat and say hi and where you are calling from today, calling in from. I always feel like a live radio host when I say that, like sports talk radio. Where are you calling from? Hi, Melissa from Denver. Thanks for joining us today. I think this question about audience engagement, Denise, will be interesting one to get engagement from everybody on the webinar today. So we should have close to 100 people. So it'll be interesting to hear what people have done. We have 5 kind of general strategies that we're going to walk through for folks that haven't thought about this very much, but there are tons of things out there that people do. So I'd love to hear from folks when we get into the question and answers section about kind of what folks are doing to encourage audience engagement and what's working.
Yeah, likewise. And this is a good segue to remind everyone to feel free to drop your questions also in that question tab as we're kind of going through our presentation, or, as you think of them, they can be related to audience engagement. But if you have other questions related to podcasting in general, whether you're just getting started or if you're a pro, feel free to drop them in that question tab and we will be answering them through our Q&A after this presentation. And welcome, Jack from Chicago.
Cool. So we're going to get started here in just a minute. For those who are just coming in, if you could stop in and say hey in the chat, that would be awesome, and where you're logging in from. And then we do have a poll running. If you scroll down towards the bottom of your screen, talking about audience engagement, I'll talk about audience engagement for 10 or 15 minutes and give some ideas and things for folks to chew on and try and implement in their shows. And then we'll take questions and answers for the rest of the hour. And like Denise said, if you have a question, scroll down in the questions area on the bottom of the screen and drop your question in there, and then we'll get to those here in just a few minutes. Awesome. So I will go ahead and get started. For the folks who didn't get the intros, my name is Craig Hewitt. I'm the founder of Castos, along with Denise Meckel from our marketing group. So we're going to talk today about kind of two things. One is definitely the question and answer section, but before that, we're going to talk about audience engagement and participation in your show. And I think this is a really important topic because podcasting kind of by default is you talk and other people listen. That's like the core of it, right? But I think the place where people have taken their shows a step further and used their shows as a platform to encourage community and engagement and moving their message from just a podcast into other things is around community engagement. And so we're going to talk through 5 strategies or ways that you can approach engaging your audience in between or within an episode. And the 5 things are things like emails and voicemails, blog our communities like Facebook groups and other types of digital online communities, blog comments and how you manage and encourage those, roundtables as a podcast format. So not just you talking and everyone else listening or you and a co-host, but a true kind of audience participation within your show. And then doing live episodes, which really are more like a webinar. We have some of our customers that are doing live episodes and seeing a lot of success. We'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. So the first one is maybe like the most traditional one, and we see this a lot in either written or vocal media. So people leaving email messages for the host or hosts of the show, or voicemails. For both, I think the kind of best thing to encourage is have this be part of the regular call to action that you have in your podcast. Say, hey, if you have any questions for us or comments about what we talked about today in the show, shoot us a message, podcast@castos.com, and we'll include your question and respond to it in the next episode. So that's a really kind of standard one. I think it works really well. It's a pretty low ask of your audience. They don't have to do anything weird like record into their computer. If they're not a podcaster, they might feel really weird about how do they record and how do they send it to you and all these kind of things. I think a best practice here too is having a dedicated email address just for your show. So if you're running your podcast as part of a larger organization or a business or something like that, have your own inbox just for the podcast so you can keep those kind of separated from everything else. For voicemail, there are some dedicated tools just for this. And if anyone is using a tool other than SpeakPipe, I would love to hear about it. SpeakPipe, I know, has been around forever. And I don't know if it's still kind of the best thing out there. So if other folks are using things specifically for this, I would love to hear about it. Google Voice, I know, is another option that folks use that is, so you can register a Google Voice number for free. So it's kind of like a virtual online phone number that you can have just for your podcast, and people can leave you voicemails there. And you can download those MP3s and then insert them back into your show for like the next episode, or if you have a Q&A episode at some point. And then similarly, maybe kind of a little low-tech solution is to just encourage people to record something on their computer and then upload it using something like Dropbox or Google Drive. So the real kind of important thing here is to allow a way for people to send you feedback in between episodes. One of the important things here is this is a cool way to give the folks who are calling in or sending emails props on the next podcast episode. So, hey, we got this cool email from Jack. Jack asked about blah, 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 blah. Check out Jack's podcast or Jack's website or the things that Jack is doing over here. When you're able to give a shout out or props back to somebody who is participating in your show, that encourages the other people that are listening to do the same thing so that, they might get that same shout out. Community is something that we've talked about in some other editions of Office Hours, and really is a very powerful community building tool, I guess. So things like Facebook groups, Slack channels, Discord channels, which is kind of similar, like a forum, or even in-person events. All of these are places where people in your world can go to have discussions around your podcast and around your brand in between episodes. And so as opposed to something like a voicemail or an email where one person is sending a message to you, a community and a forum of some sort is like a many-to-many type discussion. So it's not just you and another person have a discussion, it's all 300 people in the Facebook group having a discussion about this thing, whatever the topic of your most recent podcast episode was. I think if I was going to pick one single thing to do to encourage audience communication and participation in my show, it would be some type of online community. Facebook, love them or hate them, makes groups really easy. And so that might be the best place to go. But I think the rule here is go wherever your audience already is. If you're, a podcaster and you want to have a podcast about podcasting, a lot of those people are on Facebook. So Facebook groups might make the most sense. If it's a professional organization that you have a podcast for, maybe in-person events is the thing, because you guys have a meetup every other week and audience communication would then happen in person. So kind of leave that up to you for your particular instance where you're already engaging with your audience, and just do more of it in that medium. So blog comments are a really interesting thing if you encourage and manage them really well. I would say, first of all, you have to have a platform that lets you have comments. So I know some podcast hosting platforms don't have the concept of comments for posts. That's cool. If you have a proper website for your podcast, like on WordPress using something like Serious System of Podcasting, then obviously WordPress has commenting built right in. And one of the best things that we've seen to encourage comment participation for episodes is if you have a guest on your show, to align with the guest beforehand to say, I'm going to have you on your show. That would be great. We'll publicize this. It'll be great for your audience building. In return, I would really appreciate if you could come in and participate in the comments for this episode for the next week after the episode goes live. So that allows you're going to have a discussion with a guest about a topic, and then afterwards your audience can come in and say, hey, I heard Denise talking about this thing on your episode, but I didn't hear Craig talk to Denise about this thing. I had a question about this or clarification about this one point they made. So it lets your audience participate with the guest kind of after the episode comes out. And with this, kind of like we were talking about with giving a shout out or props for good comments, similar to the voicemails or emails, to say, hey, we had a really interesting comment on our last episode. Bob was asking about this thing. Bob is located over here. You can check out his stuff here or there. So all of these things are kind of like positive reinforcement mechanisms to encourage more of this. When people are hearing that other audience members are participating and giving feedback and creating dialogue, it makes them want to do it too, and kind of lets them know that it's okay. The next one is really a podcast format, and that is roundtables. I think this might be more difficult for some people to pull off than others. But the idea really here is that you can have a regular rotation of certain members of your audience on your show, and so they can participate directly in your podcast. I've seen this happen a lot in the tech world. So you have like industry experts come on and talk on regular intervals once a month or every other month or something like that. You have a panel talk about this particular thing. And I think it works really well when they are topically grouped. So you talk about one little micro niche of your topic, and you have the same 6 people on every time. And you go talk about another one, and you group them together. And I have on here that this is really great for networking, because like networking is one of the maybe kind of hidden secrets of podcasting. But if you're able to say, I have the 20 top thought leaders in my space on my podcast every 2 or 3 months, then those 20 people are going to be really, good friends in the end. And this is a cool way for you to use your podcast as a way to reach and stay engaged with these people. And they will really appreciate it, because even now here in 2019, podcasting is really popular, but especially in some industries, it is something really new to especially a lot of professional people. So I think this could be a really interesting way to offer something to people that are thought leaders in your space that they might not be getting, elsewhere. And the last one here is live streaming. One of our customers I know does live streaming with a lot of success. It's their kind of format preference in podcasting. They kind of reuse their live stream events as regular podcast episodes, but they do episodes primarily kind of as live streaming events. And you can do this on Facebook, on YouTube, kind of natively. There are tools that let you record while you're doing this and repurpose that content later. And you can use webinar platforms like we have today to live stream a message, and then you turn this into a podcast later. And that's actually what we do. So we record this, we put it on YouTube natively. We also strip out the audio, and we make this into a podcast episode. So you can listen to our Podcast Hackers podcast. If you missed this today, or you want to kind of tune into other office hours episodes, we live stream this as a webinar. But we also make this into a podcast, and it comes out about a week after these live webinars. The downside is the audience participation for that kind of latent podcast isn't available, but for everyone who's online here today, you can ask questions and we can have dialogue. And so it's really cool for us to be able to chat with everyone here, real time, answer questions, have a discussion, and hear kind of what's working for you and what's not, what challenges folks are having. I really like this as a medium a lot, and is something that we're doing more and more of. So maybe the most important thing and the place where people get scared about this is, what if I encourage this communication and discussion and nothing happens? And that's a real concern. And the angle or the cheat or the strategy here is to kind of front load some of this engagement. So if it's a community you're starting, get 5 or 10 people that you can say, hey, please come in and participate in my Facebook group every day or every other day or something like that, so that when you invite all these other people in, it's not just a ghost town. If you're doing a Q&A webinar like we're doing, have some questions that people are asking a lot, but might not ask live on the webinar. We always have those because we have questions that come into our support channel, or we have in blog comments that we know are kind of hot topics that people are asking about. And so Denise and I always have those questions ready to go in case we answer all the questions by 45 minutes into the episode. We can say, hey, this is a question we get a lot, so we thought we'd cover this today. It's just a nice way to keep the content going, encourage that discussion, even if you don't have that kind of nexus of engagement going just yet. So kind of just to recap, these are kind of the 5 ideas that we have of ways to encourage audience participation in your podcast. The first being emails and voicemails. These are kind of asynchronous. Communities like Facebook groups. This is a great way to encourage the one-to-many or many-to-many discussions. Blog comments as a way for your audience members to participate with you or a guest after the episode in an asynchronous way. Roundtables as a format of a podcast to have some regular members of your audience or your kind of world on to talk about your topic. And then live episodes is a way to have real one-on-one, real-time communication and dialogue with members of your audience, and then you can repurpose that back into a podcast episode later. But the actual thing that you're recording is an actual, real engaged piece of content. So with that, we're going to roll into the question and answers section of the webinar today. The kind of ground rules are anything goes, basically. So anything around getting started, launching your podcast, the technology, gear, distribution, anything goes. And it does not have to be around audience engagement. So this is really, we like to have these 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning to have something to talk about, for us to share a little bit about what we know and what we think. But the questions can be about anything. And so if folks have questions, please drop them in below. Scroll down on your screen and drop in a question. I see we have some stuff in the chat here that we will open up and chat through now.
Melissa. So Melissa just dropped in our first question specific to the roundtable suggestion. What's kind of the best way to get the best sound quality if your guests are spread out around the country? What would you suggest, Greg?
Yeah, so there's a couple of tools that do this, and they do it really well. One is called Zencastr, Zencastr, and the other is called Squadcast.fm. So squadcast.fm. We can drop the links to those in the chat over here so you can check them out. And they both do really, really high quality remote recordings specifically for podcasting. So I know Zencastr is audio only. Squadcast is audio and video. So depending on kind of what medium you're wanting to record, either or both of those might be a good option for you there. I've used both, and all of my recordings going forward are going to be with Squadcast. It's a really exceptional tool. And what kind of both of these you do that tools like a webinar software or even Zoom don't do is they record locally on your computer and locally on your guest computers if you have multiple guests, so that things like internet latency and dropout aren't a factor, because you have a local recording, just like if you were recording it on, with something like QuickTime or Audacity.
Great audio. What kind of best editing programs would you recommend for people just starting out?
Yeah, really great question, Jeremy. The tool we like to use is called Audacity. And Audacity is a free open source project that is cross-platform. So it works on both Windows and on Mac, and is a really powerful but kind of easy to use tool. There is certainly a learning curve to it. If you go on to YouTube and type in Castos Audacity, we have a couple of tutorials there on how to use it. We actually walked through that in last week's edition of Office Hours. It's just a pretty short one, but yeah, Audacity is the tool that we recommend for everybody. It's certainly good enough as you're getting started, and even a lot of professional and higher end podcasters use Audacity. It's a really powerful tool to do editing. You can also record locally with it. So if it's just you doing a podcast, a lot of folks just record right in Audacity, do their editing, and so they don't have to mess with, recording here, exporting the file, importing it into the editing tool, and things like that. So it's kind of a dual threat tool that you can do both recording locally, at least, and editing. And when I say locally, so if you're calling somebody across the country or something like that, it wouldn't work in that situation. But if it's just you or you and a co-host in the same room,
form to have. So do you think it's better to have more of a niche or an open forum in terms of audience and like who you're targeting to speak to?
Yeah, Jim, I would, if you could give a little more clarity around kind of what your topic is in general, that might help us answer this a little bit better, because, and you just drop it in the chat if you'd like, because I think it depends is the answer. If, I would say if you're more of like an entertainment style show, then keeping it open probably is good, because you think about some of these really huge podcasters that they really don't have a specific niche that they talk about very much. But if you're doing something like a business podcast, or you're podcasting for a local organization or something like that, then you would want to niche down pretty good to be able to reach a really specific audience and tailor your content to exactly that audience and the things that they're concerned about and struggling with and want to hear more about. But if you have just a general entertainment podcast, I think that leaving it open gives you a lot of options to pivot and see what your audience is really engaging with and kind of change tack down the road without having to, rebrand the podcast entirely or anything like that. So I would say, Jim, it probably depends a little bit about kind of what area of podcasting you're going into and what type of content you're going to be recording to give a really kind of solid, definitive answer there. But if you could drop a comment in the chat about kind of which area of this that you're going, that would be helpful for us. I would love to hear from folks. If you want to drop in the chat and let us know like what you're doing to encourage audience and manage audience participation with your podcast. Would love to hear what everyone else is doing. We're certainly not the end-all be-all authorities on all this stuff. We've done a fair amount of podcasting, but always love hearing what is working well for others.
Some responses to roll in. I have
especially if it's something we didn't cover as part of those
we talked a lot about
topics or ideas.
Podcast guests and having them engage with the audience after the episode records.
Is working or is not working.
For someone who's kind of just starting out, do you have any general tips or strategies on how I can get more guests to attend my show, to come on to my show?
Yeah, so recruiting guests is an interesting one. I think that at its core, there has to be something in it for them. And for most people, it can be you have on a guest to be able to share your audience with them and share their message with your audience. So it really should be kind of symbiotic in that respect. So you have on a guest because you can kind of propose to your guest, hey, I have 500 or 5,000 listeners, and if you come on, then your message will be shared with all those people. And that should be a pretty high value thing that you can propose to these folks. If you're just starting out, I use having guests on podcasts as like a networking opportunity. So you can say, hey, I know you're a trusted kind of authority in this space. I would love to hear your thoughts on this thing. We could make it a podcast episode and it will go out to our audience. You don't have to tell people how big your audience is if you're just starting out. And I think a lot of people, again, even here in 2019, are really flattered that you would invite someone on as a podcast guest, because it really is a pretty high compliment to say, hey, I think a lot of what you do and kind of where you stand on these things, would love to have you on to chat more about this. And I guess the other thing I would say there is to kind of stair step your way up that ladder. So don't go for the top dog in your space or your organization or your industry or whatever. Start with somebody that is pretty close to where you are in your journey, because those people will be really relatable to your audience, and a lot of times those are the best guests that you have on. And then you can go to the next kind of rung up that ladder and say, hey,
LinkedIn
I had
for his
Gary on my podcast. He was really great.
LinkedIn, I think, is a really interesting strategy.
We had really great audience
use that for your own
engagement
podcast,
after that episode. Would you like to come on and talk about this other thing? I think we would have similar kind of levels of engagement and success afterwards. I don't. I'm not a big LinkedIn person. But I know, particularly as you get kind of further to the B2B side of the business spectrum, it is a really popular and really powerful platform. So I'm not surprised, like Jack said, that's been a successful space for him. I know quite a few people
really pushes you to be more towards the industry leader
really
in
heavily
space.
in LinkedIn,
so it could be a nice little
and especially
anecdote to add to your own LinkedIn profile if you're going to be a
for
guest
where
on
a lot of
someone
us use
else's show
Facebook
as well.
for kind of regular personal social sharing. People use LinkedIn for business sharing, and yeah, it's really powerful. One of the other really kind of like hidden benefits of having guests on your podcast or being a guest on someone else's podcast is backlinking and link building. So theoretically, every time you're a guest on someone else's podcast, they will link to you and to your website or your business or your group or your social media profile.
With thinking
and links
about
are a
the number of
huge
shows per
indicator
week,
to
what's
Google
kind of
and the
the
search engines of how important or relevant somebody is.
Currently, he's publishing
and so
3 times
either
a week,
for you
and
to
his
go
numbers
guest
are
on
up,
someone else's
but he's
podcast,
unsure
or when you're
if he'll be
recruiting
able to
guests
sustain that
to you to say, hey, we will
What are your
link
thoughts,
to you
Greg?
and your business and your Twitter or LinkedIn page. And that's an easy thing for you to give back to that guest, and that they should place quite a bit of value on that. Yeah, I think the last part there is really the important one. Is you should publish as much as you can. And that seems really simple maybe, but if you're able to consistently put out 3 episodes a week and they're high quality and your audience is engaging with them and your numbers are growing, if you can keep that up, then I would for as long as you can. If you find that that's difficult, then ratcheting it back down to 1 or 2 is fine. I say that you should not have less than 1 every other week. And so it sounds like Jack is way far ahead of that, and that's great. I'm envious, Jack. But the thing is, if you're less than every other week, then your audience really just loses interest and kind of, I hate to say it, maybe forgets about you in between those episodes, because we all have 8,000 things going on every day. We can't necessarily be bothered to remember about a podcast that only comes out once a month. So I think we typically find that people who podcast more infrequently than once every other week kind of just lose interest. Their audiences aren't really that engaged, and their download numbers kind of reflect that. I think 3 a week is a lot, and that's awesome if your audience is engaging with that and things are kind of going up and to the right. I would keep that going as long as you can. And the big thing with all of this, like publishing schedule stuff, is when you do decide that you want or need to ratchet that back down, communicate that with your audience, either in a kind of dedicated mini episode or as like a custom intro to one episode, and say, hey, we've been doing 3 episodes a week. It's been really great, but we're moving back to 1 a week or 2 a week or 1 every other week or something like that because of XYZ and whatever the XYZ is. But to give your audience an expectation and let them know what's going on so that they don't think that you just flaked out and didn't have time or didn't want to record episodes anymore, but give them, the honest, good reason that you're moving from 3 episodes a week to 2 or to 1 or to every other week.
Content.
So they know what to expect, so that when another episode doesn't come on Friday, YouTube, but it comes next Wednesday, they'll say,
that
hey, that's cool. Jack told me that he's going to be going to once a week. Totally cool.
Might be a good opportunity to kind of record video as you are
and engaged.
Episodes.
If you don't,
can you kind of walk us through the benefits of
say they might think less of you. They might think you take your podcast less seriously if you don't set that expectation for them. Yeah, for sure. So I think that the kind of either way you look at repurposing your content, the goal is to record once and then have your content go to as many different places as you can and in as many different media as possible. And so I'll talk about what we're doing today, right? So we're recording a webinar today, so it's live. So it's Denise and I's face and the slides, and so that's video and audio that we're recording. And so this is a live webinar, and it's being recorded. And we'll pull the video recording down, and we'll publish that to YouTube directly to our YouTube channel in the Office Hours playlist. We'll also then strip out just the audio of this and combine it with intro and outro and music, like a typical podcast episode would be, to repurpose this video content into just audio for folks who just like listening to podcasts and don't want to go to YouTube and sit for the hour that we'll be recording this today. And that last part I think is really important, is that there are a lot of different types of information consumers out there. There are people that like YouTube. There are people that like live events like this. There are people that like podcasts. There are people that like to read transcripts or read kind of show notes. We also do that. We take and write up really kind of informational, concise, resource-heavy show notes for each webinar or podcast episode, whichever way you want to look at it. So there's video, there's audio, and there's written. Conversely, a lot of people just record audio for their podcasts. And within Castos, we have a feature we call YouTube Republishing, which takes your audio file, converts it to a video format with a kind of a still background image, and then publishes that to your YouTube channel for you. So whereas we do a lot of this manually right now, that's all automatic. And all you have to do is record your podcast episode in audio format. When you publish it to Castos, it gets converted to video and published to your YouTube channel along with the show notes or the description for the podcast episode that you have, so that you're repurposing this content from audio format to video format to achieve the same thing, which is to meet your audience where they consume content already. So there's a lot of people that like listening to audio. There's a lot of people like watching videos or consuming content on YouTube.
Work offices may block a few different websites where you can access Spotify or iTunes from your work computer, but you love listening to your favorite podcast as you do your menial work. And you can access YouTube, so it might be another area for your audience to listen to your show kind of on their time.
And then if your podcast is also on YouTube, then you really have
a nice thing that
a lot
also
of the
couples with this is
places people go to search for information covered.
And offering additional or bonus
YouTube
content
publishing,
for your
it's
audience is
literally
also
no
a nice
extra
way to
work,
engage
which
with
is,
them.
I think,
So can you kind of walk us through what you might be able to offer your audience with a premium subscription and how one might go about setting that up for their own show?
Yeah. Yeah. So the idea of, premium subscriptions is that you have some content that is available only to, I think mostly it would be paying members. So a lot of podcast content is free and will always be free. That's great. I think a lot of podcasts should always be free. But more and more, we're seeing this trend towards charging for some or all of your podcast content. And so Castos is developing what we call premium podcasting, where you'll be able to select certain episodes to kind of exist in their own little podcast that's over here that's only available for people that are paying a monthly subscription. And things that a lot of content creators are doing, and this is really a new medium or kind of angle on podcasting. So a lot of people are figuring this out as we go. But what some people are doing is like question and answer episodes, so they'll just be available to premium subscribers. Or if you have this roundtable kind of discussion, maybe you have a really cool, intimate roundtable discussion with some industry leaders. It wouldn't be available in your regular podcast feed. It's only available to premium subscribers. Something else we're seeing people doing is sending kind of teaser episodes to their regular feed, so everyone gets the first 20 minutes of this really interesting podcast, but then the rest or the full length podcast episode would be available only to premium subscribers. So I think that this is one of those things where you kind of have to ask yourself, like, how would you want to do this, both from a content creator and a business or project perspective, but also put yourself in the shoes of your audience to say, like, what would be so valuable to me that I would pay $5 or $10 a month to get this extra content from the people you really enjoy hearing from. And the answer to that is kind of how you would approach this like premium subscription model. And this is going to be available from Castos here before the end of the year, which I can't believe I'm saying that, but I mean, we're just starting the fourth quarter here on the 2nd of October. So it really is relatively just around the corner. And we see this as a huge opportunity in podcasting just in general. Other markets outside of the US have already adopted this with vigor. In China, podcasting is an enormous business, and almost all of it is around paid access to content. So, in the US, podcasting as a business is done kind of primarily by advertising. And that's great. I mean, I think it kind of comes from the radio world.
Yeah, we're very excited to get
but
that,
as we look at
off the ground.
kind of the digital,
so this
the
kind of
digital
touches
native
upon
version of this,
monetization and how
the
someone
analogy
might
that we
be able
like to use is like
to make
membership
money from their
sites.
podcast.
So
Can you walk us
a
through
lot
a
of us
few
are
other
parts of
avenues or
membership groups
pathways
or
that
online
our
communities that
attendees
are
could take
available
to
only
also
to
make some money while
members,
they make
whether
their
they're
show?
paid or not. And something like premium podcasting is the podcasting analogy of like a membership site where certain content and discussions are only available to people that pay for it. And so that's what this is all about. And we're really super excited to be able to offer this to everybody here in the next couple months. Yeah. So I think when it comes to monetization in general, there's like two schools of thought. One is to directly monetize your podcast, something like premium podcasting or paid memberships to paid subscriptions to your podcast is certainly one of them. The more traditional maybe is advertising. So you sell advertising on a per episode or per season or per group of episodes basis to an individual or a company. You read their kind of spiel, their advertisement, and your audience listens, and hopefully then kind of takes action by purchasing their thing or checking out their show or whatever. The other option that we see a lot, and frankly, for the vast majority of us, has kind of more legs and more opportunity is indirectly monetizing your podcast through something else. And for a lot of us, this is a business or a side hustle or an interest group that we're a part of, is to use the podcast as a marketing channel, which really, I mean, podcasting is a form of content marketing, and using the podcast to spread your message about the thing that's kind of behind your podcast ultimately. And that's what we're doing here today, right? We're sharing hopefully a lot of really good, interesting, useful information for everyone. And this is a form of kind of sharing what we know and sharing our brand. and sharing a lot of goodwill, I hope, with everyone in the podcasting world, whether you're our customers or you're not, and you might be in the future or you might never be. That's cool. We just want to be here to share what we know and create community engagement around podcasting so that everybody can become better podcasters. And we hope that at some point in the future, this leads to more people knowing about Castos and our team and kind of what we know and what we're able to offer. And that leads to, more business down the line. And that's kind of the promise of content marketing. And I think it works really well for a lot of different scenarios. So when I think about monetizing a podcast or any type of content, it is very much the long game. It's the give. And we see a lot of really successful brands and businesses and groups doing this because as consumers, we all just want to kind of have our needs met. and however that is done kind of most easily is what we gravitate towards. And then, hopefully down the line, you remember that, oh, hey, I listened to this podcast and they had such great information. I'm going to go check out what they have about this other thing that I need to buy or want more information about or buy a course on this thing or something like that. So when it comes to monetization, that's the angle I prefer to go
work in order to grab those sponsors.
It's just easier to monetize a podcast directly on
in terms of side hustles. So say I have a blog or something else, what kind of content is kind of ripe to be repurposed into a podcast?
Knowing all of the data of all of our customers at Castos, out of the tens of thousands that we have, there are very few podcasts that have, say, more than 20,000 downloads an episode, which is what you need really to make, I'll say, good money, certainly money that you could live on. So for the vast majority of us, it's just, I hate to say it's not an option, but it's just not a great option. I think that an interesting way that some people do kind of repurposing of blog content into podcasts are like if you've had someone guest post on your blog, to have them on your podcast and talk about the guest post and kind of have a further dialogue about some of the details of what they wrote in a guest post. And the reason for this is that like audio is such a different medium than the written word and then blogging. And you can get a lot of the why behind why somebody said something or what they said, right? So like, and the why is usually the really interesting, impactful thing to a lot of us. So having on someone who's guest posted for you to talk about that topic, again, super important. If you're the one that wrote the original piece, getting a industry leader on to talk about this particular topic, that's really cool and really it should be really flattering for them to say, hey, I wrote about SEO. Would you like to come on and talk about this SEO piece that I wrote? And we can kind of riff on different aspects of SEO. I think that's a pretty cool way to do things. And really, I think when you talk about blogging and podcasting going together, the question that a lot of folks have is how do those two fit together from like a content planning perspective? And really, I think you want to ask yourself, like,
I think podcasting offers
there content that is better suited for
convey
the
tone
written
and voice more than
medium?
the written
And is there some content that's better for the audio medium?
And
that's
Chris
a
has
question that you'll have to answer yourself.
About,
knowing your topic and your
sponsors and how you
they like
bring on
consume
more
content. But
more partners.
That's probably kind of the first place I go to say, like,
audience.
not necessarily
There is a challenge in kind of
if you're
retaining the
doing both
brand and
pieces
the
of content,
ownership of your podcast
decide
as it grows.
what's more
Do you have any suggestions on strategies
for your
on
audience
how
in
to
written
maybe
form, and
target
what's
the
better
right
and
type
more
of sponsor
impactful
for your
in
podcast
audio form?
in
And the
order
same
to
would go
not
for video,
alienate too
right?
much
If
of
you're
your
going to do
audience
explainer videos,
and making
there's some
sure
things
you're
that
kind
are
of
just better
retaining
for
your
that
voice and the
than
ethos that your
for
podcast
podcasting or for
started out with.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, Chris, this is a really interesting one. And you hear a lot about this, and I think this maybe is like one of the biggest challenges of advertising is that people come on as advertisers and they might not be really well aligned with you and your brand and your message and what your audience wants. And it's all those, what do I say, 3 or 4 or 5 things that all have to go really closely together with a potential sponsor or advertiser. So, if we had MeUndies or Casper mattresses on our podcast, everyone listening to our podcast would say, what is this? What is this all about? Like, these advertisers are not something I'm interested in. It's not aligned with what Craig and Denise are talking about with a podcasting related podcast. This just doesn't make sense to me. That's like the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is having a sponsor on that really kind of detracts from your brand and the social proof and social kind of status that you've built through your brand. That would be, potentially really damaging to all of this work, like Chris is saying, that you've done to prop up your brand and further your message, is to have on a sponsor that when people hear this message and this brand as an advertiser, they say, what is this? This is not what I would expect from Chris or from Craig, and then that could have a detrimental impact. I think this question about ownership is a really interesting one. I can imagine as you get kind of further down the road that you lose some control of these decisions. So if you are needing, quote, to sell sponsorship and airtime on your podcast, you might have to compromise on some of these kind of values and how you guard your identity and your brand. And I think that honestly is maybe one of the reasons that people are not so into advertising, is that they have all of these risks associated with them. Like Chris said, it's a cool way to make money. And I know we've sponsored podcasts in the past, and they're not cheap these days, especially in certain niches. So yeah, you can make good money if you have the download numbers, or if you're good at selling these packages. But I think the risk of introducing something into your message and your brand that would be detrimental to it is definitely real. And it's just something you should be aware of as you're going through the process of getting advertisers. Just know that a misstep here could have kind of a negative impact, but it could be a positive thing if you have advertisers and sponsors on that are real partners, like Chris is saying. Then it really can work to where you're kind of helping each other kind of become better and advance your cause there. So Chris, if you have other kind of experiences or things that you've seen with this, we'd love to hear about it. If you want to drop in a chat or another question or comment, we'd love to hear about it, because podcast advertising is kind of the Wild West still, right? I mean, I can't believe it here in 2019. It's something that there's not a ton of standardization around. There's not a lot of rules. There's things that some people expect, but it, depending on your niche or how savvy the advertisers are in your kind of world, there could be, you're the one making up the rules. The sponsors and advertisers don't come to your podcast with preconceived notions about what to expect. Almost all podcasters I know kind of make up the rules themselves. So, it's how many episodes are in a package. It's how many,
whether you have an opinion on
that
kind of
package goes
live
for,
read ads as people are bringing in sponsors, to make it more aligned with their brand. Is it something that you could go back to sponsors and say, hey, I can say the CTA, I can say these kind of
decided on like a one-off
but can I
basis.
say it in my own voice? Can I make sure to link to my show?
Versus,
asking them for the templated script that you kind of need to read verbatim. Do you see any kind of pros and cons with each strategy?
Potentially like on the lower end of having all of that control, because you don't have that control. You can't decide who's going to be kind of participating in your show. So I think Denise will take one more question maybe. Yeah, I think the best way to do this, and the folks at Gimlet Media kind of pioneered this with the Startup podcast, is the host read ads convert better for the sponsor. And so you should let them know that. Say, hey, the data around this is pretty convincing. We could pull up this data and we can include it in the show notes for this edition of Office Hours. But you saying this in your own words is absolutely the best way, because then it resonates with your audience more and seems more genuine to them. And so I think that having a sponsor provide you with a script is great, but then you as the podcaster need to say, yep, I got your script. I'm going to modify it some. It's still going to have the core message, but this is what I'm going to say. And when we've sponsored podcasts in the past, this is how it's always gone. And then they send you that host read ad before it goes into the podcast episode. Say, hey, this is the script you sent me. This is what I read. Does this sound okay? And we listen to it and say, yep, that's great, or no, this is not okay. I'd really want more of this or that or the other. But generally, I mean, if you have a good relationship with the podcast that you're sponsoring, all of that should be aligned, and there shouldn't be any surprises there. But yeah, you as the advertiser definitely want to have a host read message, because it just performs better for your business. And you as a podcaster definitely want to read your own ads, because the message comes across like it's your message, and you have more control over kind of how authentic and aligned that is with the rest of your brand. So cool. Well, thank you everyone who came on the webinar today for your questions and comments and engagement. It was really fun. This is a topic that I love, and I think really separates the premium shows from the ones who might struggle to get traction. So if you're not encouraging kind of audience communication and engagement with your podcast, it's definitely worth thinking about. We will have an email summary of this and a blog post going out here in the next couple of days. So you will get an email kind of with that notification. And we're doing these office hours every week, every Wednesday at noon Eastern. And so to sign up for the next one here in about another couple of hours, you can go to castos.com/office hours and sign up for the next edition. And we'll be sending out some more information about what that looks like here shortly. So thanks to everyone who came on today, and we will see you next week.